Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well and happy Valentine's Day. I love all you guys. I'm happy to spend time here with you guys. So, the topic of my talk today is desire versus craving. You know, people who've um, practiced with me for a while probably heard me go off on the difference between desire and craving, and it's part of our formal curriculum for various things with our group. And but it's I think in Western Buddhism, at least, I can't speak for Eastern Buddhism. I think one of the most enduring and pervasive misunderstandings of Buddhism is that all desire is bad or wrong or should be avoided or tried to be rooted out. And a lot of this belief just comes from what's arguably kind of sloppy translation, especially like the early years of the dissemination of Buddhism from the East to the West. And, if you look at the Four Noble Truths, it says pretty explicitly that craving is the root of suffering. Part of the challenge is, if depending on the translation you're using, sometimes it will say desire is the root of suffering. And this leads to all sorts of issues with people's relationships to Buddhism. Part of it is a lot of people end up in these kind of I don't know if despising is the right word, but self-critical loops where their natural plans and desires and preferences they see as wrong. And when people have, when they have desires and plans and expectations and so forth, they see their practice as lacking. They're like, oh, look at that, I preferred a burrito to a bagel. I suck at Buddhism. Or, I think maybe a little bit more damaging is people come to the point where they think, having an aspiration for awakening is a sign, or even just a more wholesome mode of living is a sign of, wrong practice, right? You often hear people say, um, um, you know, gaining mind is bad at practice, and so forth. And I think there's even a book from a Korean Zen master where, wanting enlightenment is a big mistake. And certainly from a certain point of view, this is not an incorrect perspective. Arguably at the moment of awakened perception, at the perspective of an awakened way of looking or of processing reality, it's absolutely true that nothing is gained. There the an awakened mode of perceiving reality is always there, right? And what often happens with the awakening process is a dropping away as opposed to a gaining of something. And so, from a teaching perspective and a direct pointing or motivated perspective, to say nothing is gained by practices, from the practice perspective of awakening is absolutely correct, right? But it doesn't mean that having an aspiration for awakening is a problem. And in fact, we're all Mahayana. Whether you're an official Buddhist or not, we're practicing under a Mahayana context, and there's a very explicit desire that we have, or aspiration that we have as Mahayana practitioners, and that's to save all sentient beings. And being sentient beings ourselves, part of our aspiration is to save ourselves, and by save, we mean liberate from suffering. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the technical aspects of the difference between desire and craving. So desire is the word that's often translated from the Pali, and I think Sanskrit too, chanda. And then there's craving, which in Pali is tanha, and then in Sanskrit is a word I've actually never heard another human being pronounce. I actually don't know how it's pronounced, but it's basically has a lot of consonants and no vowels except the ends. I think it's pronounced Trishna or something. Trishna. I think there's like a little bit of a nasal nya in there. Trishna. But I'll just say tanha because I don't know how to say Trishna or whatever. And it's not a word, like, usually even in the Zen context when cravings talk about it, I've heard tanha uses the word even though it's Pali. And the context there is Zen being a Mahayana religion. Most Mahayana texts were originally written in Sanskrit, where Pali is probably closer to the original language the Buddha himself spoke, and became the language of the Pali Canon, which is the main scriptures for Theravada Buddhism. Those same scriptures exist in Mahayana too. They're called the Agamas, at least in China. I'm not sure. I think Tibetan Buddhism too. But they're largely the same scriptures that are in the Pali Canon, but they originally were in Sanskrit. All right. Well, anyway, so desire is basically anything that your brain or your mind wants or expects or hopes for. It's one interesting thing to note about desire is we don't actually choose what we desire if you really pay attention. Typically things just pop into our brain. Here, sorry. My V is kind of messed up. Usually, if you're going through life, like all of a sudden, something that you want just kind of pops into your brain. Like you don't make that decision for it to happen. For example, I think I've told some of you individually that I've decided to kind of do a career transition. So right now I'm, technically speaking, a software engineer, software developer. I think my formal title is director of technology, for the small company I work for. Even though I do a lot of stuff that's not just technical, like I do a lot of course creation for the company I work for and so forth. And, but, I've decided to, at some point, there was a decision to do a career transition where I'm going to do more kind of a helping profession, like counseling or mental health or so forth. And so I'm in the process of, doing that educational journey, or at least starting it. But I don't really remember making a decision, like a explicit decision to do it. It's just something that kind of popped in my head. And by me, I mean like my real time problem solving, present moment functioning of my mind. Like that part of my experience of living, I don't think is what really came to the desire, to the plan to switch my career. My desire, my plan to switch my career just kind of happened. It kind of just emerged out of nowhere. So even like if we do kind of erroneously vilify desire, we don't really have much control over it happening anyway. It's kind of just going to happen. And so I'm going to quote some Buddhist scriptures on our chanda or desire. So I'll be quoting from translations from the Pali Canon, but remember that these aren't just Theravada scriptures. These are Mahayana scriptures as well that exist in the Agamas. And I've compared Pali versions and Agama versions, and there sometimes are differences, occasionally differences that actually change the teaching focus a little bit, but for the most part, they're like 99% similar. So anyway, even though these are Pali Canon translations, like these are also the teachings of our Zen tradition. All right, so this first quote comes from the Padhansa Sutta. I always mangle these translations, so bear with me. And that's translated as the effort discourse. And this is the quote from the sutra. Monks, there are these 4 right efforts. What for? Here, bhikkhus, and bhikkhu means monk. A bhikkhu generates desire, endeavors, arouses energy, upholds the mind, and strives for the non-arising of evil, unwholesome states that have not arisen. Unwholesome states not arisen. So he says desire. So chanda is in that sentence. He's saying like part of the right effort is to have the desire to strive for the non-arising of bad, unwholesome states. All right, and he goes on. One generates desire, endeavors, arouses energy, upholds the mind, and strives for the abandoning of evil, unwholesome states that have arisen. And then the third right effort is one generates desire, endeavors, arouses energy, upholds the mind, and strives for the arising of wholesome states that have not yet arisen. And the last one is one generates desire, endeavors, arouses energy, upholds the mind, and strives for the stability, the non-confusion, the increase, the abundance, the development, and the fulfillment of wholesome states that have arisen. These are the 4 right efforts. So, anyone who believes that, desire is fundamentally not appropriate in Buddhism, you can just show them this. I mean, here's the words of the Buddha himself, or at least attributed to this guy. Certainly, you could say it's part of the foundational, widely held understanding of traditional Buddhism, where desire is being shown in a positive light and is even shown as kind of necessary. And that kind of leads us to the next sutta, which is the Kanki Sutta, which means with Kanki discourse. So Kanki is a person. And here's this quote. Then he settles faith in him. Filled with faith, he approaches. Approaching, he attends. Attending, he lends an ear. Lending an ear, he hears the Dharma. Having heard the Dharma, he memorizes it. He examines the meaning of the teachings he has memorized. As he examines the meaning, the teachings are accepted through reflection. And then there's acceptance through reflection. Desire arises. Having desire, he makes an effort. Having made an effort, he weighs it up. Having weighed it up, he strives. Being resolute, he realizes the ultimate truth with the body. And having pierced it with wisdom, he sees it. So here, what the Buddha is saying is, when you encounter the teachings, understand it, memorize it, and then desire to actualize it. And I love this wording. He realizes the ultimate truth with the body, and having pierced it with wisdom, he sees it. And I love this because, in our tradition, we put a lot of emphasis on the embodiment of practice. It's a body-centric focus, and I really like seeing it in these traditional teaching. So here's another quote from the traditional Buddhist teachings about desire. This one is in the Sanidana Sutta, which means with a cause discourse. And so here's an example of unwholesome desire. And so desire is not always wholesome. Like desire can be negative as well. And so here's an example of this. So bhikkhus, which means monks, conditioned by the element of ill will perception arises. Conditioned by ill will perception, ill will thought arises. Conditioned by ill will thought, ill will desire arises. And ill will desire has it's a compound word, but it ends with chando, which is the chanda being used functionally in the Pali language. Conditioned by ill will desire, ill will fever arises. Conditioned by ill will fever, ill will search arises. Bhikkhus, conditioned by the element of cruelty perception arises. Conditioned by cruelty perception, cruelty thought arises. Conditioned by cruelty thought, cruelty desire arises. Conditioned by cruelty desire, cruelty fever arises. Conditioned by cruelty fever, a cruelty search arises. And so, the reason I bring this discourse is just to show that desire is in itself is kind of neutral. To have plans or to have inspiration or to have something that you want to do can be good, it can be wholesome, or it can be bad. Like if I wish bad things to happen to people, that's arguably not a wholesome desire. So desire is a human, conceptual, not conceptual, but cognitive process is neutral. We can desire wholesome things or we can desire unwholesome things. So where do desires come from? We will look at another sutta that will give us some insight into that. And so it's the Sakapana Sutta, and it's translated as Saka's Questions Discourse. Saka is a person. A lot of times the person talking to the Buddha gets their name in the official Buddha title. All right. But good fellow, what is the source of what is liked and disliked? Desire is the source of what is liked and disliked. And desire in this is chanda. What is the source of desire? Thought is the source of desire. But what is the source of thought? Dualistic conceptualizations are the source of thought. And dualistic conceptualizations is my translation of papancha. Sometimes papancha is translated as conceptual proliferation. And I don't like that translation because proliferation seems like it's implying ruminating or worrying or spinning out of control. But papancha could be 1 second of one thought. It's not necessarily spinning out of control. What it is, it's viewing reality, objectifying it, making it dualistic, and then having an opinion about it on how it's self-relevant to you. So that's prapancha. And so another way you can think about it is it's a collection of our dualistic beliefs about the universe, how it works, what it's made of, from the perspective of our self-referential needs. All right. So, all right, let's talk about craving or tanha or trishna, which I think is the Sanskrit pronunciation. So, first of all, it should be noted that craving is a type of desire. So craving is desire. It's just a special type of desire. You'll find it in the Four Noble Truths. Craving's the source of suffering. And in the chain of dependent arising, craving manifests or arises because of feeling, right? And so basically we're a being, we're a perceiving and deciding entity that has senses. Senses make contact with objects, which creates a feeling, and from that feeling, craving can come up. And so that kind of gives us one clue of the difference between craving and desire in general. Is craving is very specifically a sensory-oriented phenomenon. And so here, let's formally talk about how craving exists in the Four Noble Truths. So this is one sutra I always struggle with the pronunciation. It's the Dhammacakka Pavatana Sutra, often translated as setting forth the wheel of the Dharma discourse, or rolling forth the wheel of the Dharma discourse. It's one of the fundamental. Sutras of Buddhism that kind of just defines the practice. Okay, so here's what. Now this is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, old age is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering. Being coupled with the disliked is suffering. Separation from the liked is suffering. Not getting what you wish for is suffering. In brief, the 5 grasping aggregates are suffering. Now, this is the noble truth of suffering. It is the craving that leads to birth mixed with the relishing in greed, taking pleasure where it lands. That is the craving for sensual pleasures, craving to continue existence, and the craving non-existence. So, kind of summarizing that, it's a very survival-based craving. Desire. So, the reason we have feeling tones that can make contact with objects and then could lead to craving, is because feeling good is a signal from the mind, from the brain, that, okay, could very well be something that is conducive to survival. And the continued existence or craving of non-existence, if this is just too rough and we don't want to be here anymore, it's again because of the feelings are unpleasant in that case, or the craving to continue existence, the feelings are great, and we want to, and that's kind of like the body survival. Like, keep doing this. Like, so if I see a bunch of donuts, my programming is like sugar and fat is like, from the subconscious's perspective, is a great, like in this scenario we were designed for, pre-agricultural society, we, you come upon something very fatty or very sweet, that would be a rare phenomenon. We should eat as much of it as we can. Like, that's conducive to our survival. But in our modern, agriculturally abundant scenario, we have plenty of access to sweets and fats. And so, I come upon donuts, my subconscious is going to be, eat as much of this as you can, because it may not be here tomorrow. But, and so the point is, your craving's very survival based. And if you watch your own life, you'll notice the stronger you crave for something will be almost completely correlated to how much it is tied to our survival. The survival implications of something. So, for example, in my case of my career switch, occasionally I'll find my mind kind of grasping at a future that I want, or worrying that it may not happen, because I'm in the process of applying to grad schools, and which is ends up being more competitive than I was expecting. And so I'm waiting to hear from my preferred grad school, which is coming up. I should find out soon, but I've noticed my brain will start thinking like, well, like, when am I going to get this answer? What's taking them so long? And since these are kind of negative thoughts a little bit, like, I'll notice there's a bit of dukkha in there. There's a bit of aversion, and like, because the human mind is super not cool with uncertainty, and even even though it's not, the suffering's not been, the dukkha, the dissatisfaction's not been that intense. I've pretty much caught it as soon as it's arisen each time. It's there, and the reason my brain is focusing on this instead of other things is because, the way my life is, both of my wife and I, we both need to be having an income coming in every month to afford a living. Where we couldn't really survive in our current life with just one income. And so my brain's like, this is really important to have this job. You don't want to lose this opportunity. This has to happen. So, like, my subconscious is assigned a lot of survival importance to me being accepted in this, especially in this particular program, because I won't go into details, but there's a lot of reasons why it would be a good program for me. And so it's very ripe for my brain to crave and then grasp at it because of the survival implications. All right, I'll read one more sutta here, and then we can open up to discussion. So this sutta is the Tanha Sutta, or the Craving Sutta. It's also sometimes called the Craving the Weaver. And here's the text. Mendicants, or bhikkhus, I will teach you about craving, the weaver, the migrant, the creeping, the clinging. This world is choked by it, engulfed by it. It makes the world tangled like yarn, knotted like a ball of thread, and matted like rushes and reeds, not escaping the places of loss. the bad places, the underworld, the transmigration. Listen, apply your mind well. I will speak. And what is that craving? There are 18 currents of craving that derive from the interior and 18 derive from the exterior. I won't go through the whole list, but basically it's a lot of self-referential thinking, past, present, and future about, is this me? Is this mine? What is going to happen to me? Who am I? And so forth. It's just a lot of time traveling, judgment focused, self referential craving, which shows that craving erupts from self referential dualistic thinking. It's a very self oriented activity. All right. So anyway, I just wanted to take this moment to really kind of formally differentiate clinging and craving. Desire and craving. Desire is fundamentally neutral. It's not good, it's not bad. It kind of depends on what the desire is. Craving's always problematic. It's always part of the chain, ultimately part of the chain of causation that leads to suffering. Whenever, in craving, by definition, will, if left unchecked, will always lead to clinging or grasping, which is uncontrollable. This is where the real proliferation is, where we get stuck on something, either a desire that was not met or a desire that we fear may not be met. We hate the uncertainty, and this is the pathway to the primary pathway to suffering in traditional Buddhist talking. All right, so that's all I had as far as prepared remarks. If anyone's interested, you could ask questions or make comments. You can
Hey Barry,
yeah, go ahead, Carson.
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just kind of curious. You talked about how tanha comes from contact and the senses, and there's a sense in which that's right. And then you shifted to, um, sort of some aversion and stuff that comes up around your getting your degree and your career change.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking of the distinction between kama tanha and bhava tanha.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's the craving for sensual pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the craving for becoming. And when you said that, like when you were talking about how a lot of times, uh, the sort of desire can arise from, a sort of conception of self, or the
Mm-hmm.
sort of, you know, I started thinking, oh, that. So can you kind of unpack that a little bit for me? Because I think there's a lot more there, but I felt like it was like, well, Taha kind of comes from, um, the senses, and then you said it's ultimately tied to our conception of self. So I was
Mm-hmm.
just curious if you could connect those for me a little bit.
Sure. I'll do my best. So yeah. So what Carson's saying here? That was you talking. Who was talking? Was that Carson? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I saw your. I thought so, but then I saw your mic off. I got confused. Yeah. So as he's alluding to, there's three types of desire, but he mentioned two. I'm sorry, two types of craving, and he mentioned two of them. There's three types of craving, and he mentioned two of them. One's tanha, um, um, or feeling craving, and then the other is like survival or existence craving. Um, so we remembering that. So in my mind, the desire craving is a subset of the feeling craving is a subset of the survival craving. Survival craving is when we're thinking theoretically like, oh, I need this job to survive, right? There's no direct um, pleasure at hand that you're craving, but there's self-referential dualistic conceptualization that is that is driving that. So, that's where the self element comes there. And then kind of more at a kind of a real-time level, when there's actual phenomena or objects that we can encounter in life, and they produce positive or negative feelings, and we want those positive feelings, it's important to differentiate. Like, let's say there's a raspberry and I eat a raspberry. I'm feeling the feeling, and I can, the pleasure of eating it, and the texture and the sweetness, and I'm, in the distinctive flavor compounds of the raspberry, and I'm enjoying it. There's not necessarily craving in that moment, right? Craving comes at a, you could think of that as there's a hierarchy of perception and cognition as we encounter the world. At lower levels, there's just the raw sensations of what we're in contact with. As we get higher up, we get more towards the self-oriented and story-oriented and time-traveling oriented modes of cognition. So if we have a story of, I need to get more of these raspberries while they're still in season, then that can become craving when we get caught up into it with it not being fulfilled, right? Probably, maybe it's not, the most awesome example, because how many of us are really having tons of craving and clinging about raspberries? But that is the phenomenon, right? And so, the craving comes not from the raw perception, but from the self-referential, self-oriented story that is placed upon what we are perceiving, or what we might perceive, or what may go away, because there's different modes of where clinging, the clinging that emits from craving can come. It could come from something that's pleasurable that leaves, something that's not pleasurable that's here, something that's pleasurable that we want to get but don't get, right? So there's all these different modes where the self-referential story can come in, but they all emit from the self-referential thinking that is layered upon the raw sensory experience, right? Does that answer your question, Carson?
Yeah, I got it. That's the 5 aggregates of cleaning too. So it just all came together for me. Thanks, Barry.
You're welcome.
Good job. Thank you.
Anybody else? You can just talk, or you can raise your hand. Daiji, did you raise your hand? Or did you just shift position? Okay. All right. Anyone else, or should we end here?
This is Tynan.
Oh, hi, Tynan. Speak a little louder if you can.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to lay out my understanding of what you're saying, an example, and then you can correct it or explain it. What I'm hearing is, like, say strawberries are in season.
Okay.
And I want to take my family to go pick strawberries while they're in season. I have an aspiration to go do this.
Okay.
That's just a desire, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like the foundation for potentially beneficial planning.
Right.
But then the craving would be like, if I'm sitting here because we have yet to go pick strawberries while they are in season, caught up on that and suffering because we have yet to do it, we're not doing it, or the season passes or I feel like it's passing and it's upsetting me at a sensory level in the moment.
Right. The sensory level in the moment is kind of another thing, but
Okay.
where the sensory enters into, so all that's absolutely correct. Where the sensory enters into it is you want the sensory experience of the strawberries, and and there's probably multiple cravings here. You probably also want the pleasant sensory experience of doing something wholesome and fun with your family, right?
Right.
Like doing a family activity, well, at least hopefully, is a pleasurable experience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it becomes maybe less pleasurable as your kids become teenagers, but that's another story. But still, I mean, like, all joking aside, the reason you want to do that outing is because the experience of it, both from the pleasure of eating the strawberries, just maybe getting out and having a break from the drudgery and repetitiveness of life, and just spending quality time with family, like, all those are pleasurable things that 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 you're desiring or craving. It tips into aversive negativity when we start having a story recognition of the desire not being met.
Right.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Like I mean, one way I like to conceive of craving is it's one easy way to define when desire becomes craving, when it participates in the chain that leads to suffering, dukkha. And and remember, dukkha doesn't mean necessarily intense craving, right? Mild annoyance can be dukkha, right? Like and so like dissatisfaction is probably a better translation of dukkha than suffering, because suffering is such a dramatic word. But whenever there's any sort of cognitive link of causation from a desire to dukkha, to dissatisfaction, craving is always going to be a link in there. All right. So we're just about out of time here. Does anyone else have a very quick question before we go? All right. Okay. Appreciate everybody attending, and I'll see everyone at the next events. Thank you very much.